Ladies, gentlemen, and Horadrim of all ages, we recently had the release of patch 2.3.1 for Diablo 4 in Season 9. Along with that, it's also been around 2.5 weeks since the start of the season, which has given plenty of time for builds to develop, for the proper pit-pushing players to load up on their powerful equipment to get the job done, and then of course for them to then take the time to do their proper pit runs with those builds. And so today we're going to be talking about the top 10 builds in Diablo 4 as of this point in Season 9, based on their pit leaderboard performance. First up, for the patch itself, as it is important to mention that, for the vast majority of the changes made in it is actually buffing a bunch of stuff, but it's all off-meta or lesser-used skills and interactions outside of one thing. And for the most part, these aren't really big enough to warrant a full shift in pit rankings to new builds by any means. However, there is one change that affects a currently meta build, which is a pulverize base damage increase for the Druid. In theory, with all of the other multipliers added on and stuff like that, this should be somewhere around a 10 to 15% increase to their overall damage output in their strongest build, which is the pulverize puddle setup new this season. We've had a couple of new runs at the top of the Druid rankings since the patch, so it definitely has made a difference, but it is a bit hard to say how much of those extra couple of tiers gained the last couple of days are from the patch itself, and how much of it is just from good RNG on the pit run and gear improvements over that time too. Outside of that, the final caveat before we begin, these rankings will be based on unofficial pit tier clear leaderboards, meaning the builds with the top 10 submitted pit tier clears. This doesn't necessarily represent any content outside of the pit, but this is the best way that we have currently to directly compare power between different classes. Every class is represented within these top 10 builds, which is fun because sometimes that just isn't the case. And outside of one specific bug-laden outlier, this is actually the closest that balance has been, not only between the classes as a whole, but also between all of the top 10 builds in general that we've seen quite possibly in the entire life cycle of the game, with the number 10 build and the number 2 build all being within 10 pit tiers, and only the number 1 build is sort of miles ahead due to the multiple overlapping bugs. All that said then, let's begin with number 10, which is a surprisingly classic build making it on. Here we have Spiritborn, and this player completed a tier 106 pit using the Rod of Kapeleke Quill Volley Spiritborn build concept that was a big cheese on its initial release in Season 6, taking advantage of the Rod of Kapeleke unique, making core skills count as basics, and giving guaranteed crits when cast with full resource to gain a solid crit multiplier as well. This Season 9 version of the build is also using Loyalty's Mantle as a unique helmet to increase the effectiveness of the Jaguar Primary Spirit Hall effect, which is the main damage engine for not just this, but honestly all competitive Spiritborn builds right now. Essentially, it scales damage with how quickly you can apply hits to an enemy. Loyalty's Mantle increases the damage of this effect, but it also lets you reduce the cooldown on the Hunter ultimate, which is also a Jaguar skill, and this lets you spam your ultimate way more often to generate a bunch of damage buffs from the passives in the setup too. This is a very solid build and a solid upgrade to the concept from previous seasons that is uniquely fitting to Season 9, but as of this moment it is capped out around tier 106 on pit clear. Next up in the number 9 slot we have Barbarian with a build that was actually their highest tier clear early in the season, and they've been battling back and forth a little bit with this, but it seems that the new best Barbarian build just scales a little bit better with the right equipment. That said, this here is Lunging Strike Barbarian, which has completed a tier 107 pit at its highest. They get through the riffraff and rabble of the first stage of the pit quite easily and handily, honestly, getting to the boss itself with almost 7 minutes remaining, but then they spend over 6 minutes on the boss itself, so clearly that is the spot where this build has a bit of a limit. This is pretty much fully possible this season, only due to the new Barbarian unique for Season 9, the Hooves of the Mountain God. This makes it so when you use a basic skill and you have full resource, you can then cause your fury to start draining, and it continues to drain until it empties, but during that time, your basic skills now cleave, meaning they hit multiple enemies, which for Barbarian, the only cleaving basic skill before this would be Bash, with the tempering affix specifically. So this is honestly quite a big deal for making the basic skills better. It also increases basic skill damage during the effect by a large amount too, and so the entire purpose of this build is just get tons and tons of basic skill damage increases, get tons of ways to increase your actual damage through resource draining effects like the the Shard of Wrathiel unique, making basic skills cost resource to use but be able to do much more damage as a result, or Ramlodni's Magnum Opus, the unique sword that increases your skill damage in general, but also makes you just drain resource every second. Then you build the rest of your setup around just having insanely high resource generation, or reduced resource costs with things like the Ring of Starless Skies or the Crown of Lucion, and that's the whole back and forth of the build. Tons of damage increases at the cost of much resource drain you have to deal with, and then just making your resource generation then outpace that drain. In the 8th place slot today, we've got Rogues, which had their best build archetype be overtaken in pit clears from Death Trap early in the season to now being Twisting Blades, still supported by Death Trap though. Twisting Blades though is the main focus of the build, and this is the #1 Rogue build in Season 9, so if you're keeping track of overall class placements, this would put Rogue in last place, but they are still doing reasonably well with a tier 108 completed on their Twisting Blades build. This is a concept that has been around since the beginning of the game, though improved and changed quite a bit over time. It is now mostly a damage over time setup through large amounts of poison damage output coming from Twisting Blades with the Poison Imbuement skill. This is then boosted by the Corruption aspect, which gives you increased imbuement potency, the Creeping Death aspect for increased damage over time in general, the Contamination aspect for a multiplicative poison damage increase if you crit with Poison Trap, and then some Twisting Blade specific aspects and 3 whole mythic uniques as well to make this function just quite at the height that it is right now. Overall, this build spends around 9.5 minutes on the mobbing section of the pit, and then only around 5 minutes on the boss itself, which is pretty good single target for a pit pushing build, so it's not a terrible ratio by any means. According to the build creator themselves as well, they could probably squeeze like an extra tier higher if they rolled a more friendly set of enemies on the second floor or a better boss at the end, so this could very well pop up another tier in the near future as well. Next up then we go backwards to Barbarian, which we've already talked about, but ahead to their strongest build in Season 9 currently, which is looking to be Mighty Throw, once again back on its throne, with a pit tier 109 cleared, but in a very weirdly different way to when Mighty Throw used to be on top. Specifically, in the olden days of Mighty Throw, it used to be about taking advantage of a weird snapshotting bug that let you just sort of infinitely spam guaranteed overpowers through a number of different bugs, just slowly smash through enemies one little bit at a time with a skill that was not meant to be able to do that much damage. But this new version is much different, and it's a little bit more passive in a way too. It's honestly not even something I would say would work very well outside of the pit as an activity, the main reason being that it functions around the aspect of delayed extinction. This makes it so any cooldown reduction that you have that would affect Mighty Throw instead increases its damage multiplicatively. So if you stack loads and loads of cooldown reduction, the Mighty Throw still has to wait 12 seconds between casts, but it does a buttload of damage, like trillions of damage. This player then just built around that idea, shoving everything they could into Mighty Throw and cooldown reduction to boost the damage, and then in between the 12-second cooldowns, they basically just walk around getting their buffs back so they can always have a shout active and a stomp and an ult ready to pop before they actually use Mighty Throw. And then in between casts, they just sort of run around collecting more enemies to hit with the attack and making sure that they, don't die. Despite this being a very awkward seeming gameplay loop, it does look a bit weird to watch. They got through the entire mobbing section of their pit run in around 9 minutes, and then spent only around 5 minutes on the boss before ending the pit, with a full minute to spare just about, so this one honestly could easily go up another tier with some better RNG on the run, which is quite impressive given how hyper-specific this build is to the pit as an activity. In 6th place then we have Druid's second best build with pit tier 110 completed. This is a pretty fun one too because it is Companion Druid, specifically Wolf Druid, with the wolves doing the vast majority of the damage in this setup. This uses the Shepherd aspect on the weapon for a significant increase to companion skill damage per companion that you have. It uses the Rabid Bear aspect, which converts all direct damage during Grizzly Rage into poison, as well as making you spread rabies passively. The Stampede aspect gives you a bonus companion and bonus companion damage as well. The Moonrage aspect for bonus wolf companions, as well as the runeword that summons bonus wolves as well. Then you have the Storm's companion unique pants to tie it all together, with lightning damage coming from the wolves, making the wolves count as a storm skill. It gives you significant attack speed with the wolves specifically, and a massive amount of wolves skill ranks on top of that too. The other skills in the setup are basically used either for pure movement and utility, or to boost the player's damage and stats, because player stats transfer to wolves after one of the changes that they made in a recent season to how companions and minions function, and it's made this not just usable but full on solid as an overall build now too. Moving up to 5th place, we've got our first Necromancer build of the day, but not our last one, because this is basically a pure shadowblight scaling build, which has completed a tier 111 pit. Its main purpose is just building up the key passive of shadowblight as much as possible through the blighted aspect, which gives increased shadowblight damage per consecutive hit from shadowblight. Also the decay aspect, which makes shadowblight increase the next instance of shadowblight damage, the damned aspect and blood moon breaches for significant damage multipliers against cursed enemies, and the cursed aura aspect as well to automatically apply curses to enemies within a radius around you. Then honestly, you just want to apply most of your shadow damage buildup to trigger shadowblight effectively through the darkness enhancement for corpse explosion, making it leave corrupted pools on the floor behind. Then blight in between as often as you can, and that's the real core essence of this setup. It's honestly not crazy different mechanically speaking from how the shadow bloodwave setup works for Necromancer, but it does play quite a bit differently regardless. That said, over in 4th place we have another Necromancer build, this time the one that we just mentioned, holding the top spot for the class, which is the classic Shadow Bloodwave build that has been topping the charts pretty hard for Necromancer for multiple seasons now. Now that gear has caught up to let the top players really just blast with it, it has overtaken the Shadowblight build, and the highest tier completed for this build right now is a tier 112. But that run is really low quality footage that I wouldn't really want to show you guys, so I've got the second best run playing as the background footage on the screen, which is a 111 completion. That said, this build has completed a 112, and that makes it just ever so slightly above the previous build on the list. This one then uses the Keseme's Legacy unique pants to make Bloodwave essentially fire off twice as often per cast and in an inward direction. As well, it pulls enemies into the group very nicely to make Bloodwave hit multiple things much easier. The affixes on the pants gives you a ton of cooldown reduction and chance for double damage on Bloodwave itself. Then you mix that mainly with the ultimate shadow aspect, which makes Bloodwave count as a darkness skill that deals shadow damage and applies desecrated ground underneath itself, which then makes it work properly with the Shadowblight passive. The title aspect for bonus Bloodwaves on Bloodwave cast is also excellent for this, and then just general damage increases and shadow damage increases too, with a couple of mythic uniques to really push it up to the next level. This build was originally so strong in previous seasons that no other class could come close to Necromancer, and they have finally gotten the balance on this to the point where it is still Necro's best build, even just by a hair, and still within the same realm of power as all of the other classes too. It's no longer ridiculous. Moving on to 3rd place then, we have the only Sorcerer build that has made the cut for the list, but it did so with some serious gusto, being right up near the top of all builds, having completed a tier 116. And it's worth mentioning at this moment that this build may as well be tied for 2nd rather than being 3rd, because our 2nd place build is also a tier 116 pit that was completed literally 5 seconds faster, only 5 seconds difference. That said, regardless of how technical you want to be on the exact placement, this is a big, massive Hydra focused build, which is basically what you'll see most Sorcerers running right now as the next best Sorcerer build is currently capping out 13 tiers lower. Honestly, the Hydra builds are kicking enough butt and are cool enough as a concept that I'm good with that personally. The whole concept of this build then is based around the new unique for the class. This makes Hydra count as a core skill and limits its maximum heads to 3. But any heads that you would have had on top of 3 makes it instead larger and gives it a sizable damage multiplier as well. This also comes with increased ranks of the Primordial Binding passive, attack speed, and pyromancy damage as well, which is lovely. And then you take the Hydra enhancement that makes them apply burn damage over time, mix it with the Inferno ultimate as another hefty source of burn, and the Combustion Key passive, which all works around burn, and then you just make a big burning Hydra setup. And it's lovely to see, after the dominance of the Shatter Key passive in pit pushing builds within previous seasons, that there are really good, and in fact top pushing builds that use combustion now. In 2nd place then, we've got our top Druid build of the day, which is the Pulverize Druid that you've probably all seen going around this season. This has completed a tier 116 pit, just a little bit faster than the Sorcerer, and a fun fact that you may not have caught when it first happened is that these 116s are the first time in this list that we went up more than 1 tier in between builds. The first 7 entries are all just 1 tier above each other in a very sort of a staircase type of manner, which I feel like really speaks to the balance between classes being pretty solid in Season 9. This Druid build then is essentially essentially just revitalizing the classic pulverize concept with the addition of the brand new rotting lightbringer unique weapon that makes pulverize put down puddles of poison that scale off of the damage of the pulverize itself. Then when you pulverize within the already created puddle, they shoot out bonus projectiles of poison too. This combined with the weapon also having chance for pulverize to hit twice, massive resource cost reduction, and poison damage increase as well, just makes it incredibly good for a setup exactly like this if you can get even more poison damage. Then you add on the Rabid Bear legendary aspect that changes all direct damage into poison damage during Grisly Rage, and you build heavily around Grisly Rage, which is your ultimate skill. This lets you scale even harder with all that bonus poison damage as well, making it one of the strongest setups in the entire game at the moment. Then finally we have the build with the highest pit tier clear by a good margin, and it's heavily based around double or even triple dipping in certain multipliers in certain situations. But at this point, this has been a thing for Spiritborn since the class was added to the game 3 seasons ago, so as much as I feel like it is definitely not an intended function of the game to have all these double and triple dips, it's getting a lot harder to call it a bug because it's been here this long and not much is being done about it. The base build being used here to begin with is the Balazon's Maxolotl Poison Thorn setup for Spiritborn, using the brand new unique pants this season. This makes any attack you do to close enemies do up to 150% of your Thorns damage, and also deal a portion of that as poisoning as well. On top of that, anytime that you've dealt damage with Thorns the natural way, meaning retaliating from being hit, you increase the damage of this effect multiple times, it stacks up multiple times, and then it will just turn absolutely nasty, which is why this unique is at the core of every really powerful Spiritborn build this season, all the different variations, all built around this unique. You then basically just create a setup with the highest possible attack speed and number of hits per second as a method of triggering the Jaguar Primary Spirit Hull effect, which basically echoes a portion of the damage done in the last half of a second after every 15 hits against the same enemy. This then has a bunch of double dipping effects as well, where the original hits that you use while building up the Jaguar Spirit Hull will scale with a number of different multipliers, but then those multipliers will also apply again when you get the echo damage from primary Jaguar Spirit Hull. Then there is a further double dipping effect with the Fell Soothsayer legendary aspect, which echoes a portion of the hit that kills an enemy as bonus damage to enemies around them. Again, this double dips with your normal damage multipliers like Jaguar Spirit Hull, but then it also can buff the damage of Jaguar Spirit Hull, or Jaguar Spirit Hull can buff the damage of the Fell Soothsayer, which both make it essentially just a triple dipping combo when this overlap happens, which can cause some pretty insane numbers and basically just kill half of an entire tier 129 boss in one go. All that said, the big change with this setup is that for ages, it was fighting between Rake or Quill Volley being the best core skill to use with the build. Then a Crushing Hands variation started holding the top spot for a little bit there, and literally as I sat down to make this video, a Rake version of the build has once again overtaken the top out of nowhere. For those who don't know, all 3 of those core skills that I mentioned work as a way to apply thorns and poison within this setup, because the main thing that you just need to do is hit as quickly as possible. The main strength of the Crushing Hand version is that it gets you innate barrier gain, and it has an aspect for Crushing Hands that gives it a bunch of bonus hits, which is great for the setup. But then for Rake, you have reduced resource costs, you have some cooldown reductions on the ultimate as well, which really does add up. That said, as of the time of this video being made, the top clear is the Rake version of the build, and it is a tier 129. Yes, 129, which means 13 tiers above the second best build. And you'll see here, watching the boss kill, what's particularly funky is that they get to the boss fight with 8 minutes remaining, which is an insane amount of time. Then they spend about 6.5 minutes doing half of the health bar on the boss. Then a really fun sequence of events takes place that I will try to explain to the best of my ability. The only way this works is on a boss that has adds, so you need to have a boss with adds if you're going to play this build and push the pit. But then, when the adds die, you proc the explosion from Fell Soothsayer. When multiple of these happen in close succession, they can then fuel an absolutely massive and nasty hit from the Jaguar Primary Spirit Hull double dipping on it, especially as the thing that will cause the explosion from Fell Soothsayer. The biggest hits in this build are from the Jaguar Primary Spirit Hull, which means that that effect is most likely what will kill the enemy, and most likely the damage that will then be boosted and echoed through Fell Soothsayer itself. When multiple pops of the Fell Soothsayer aspect happen in close succession, they can then fuel another absolutely massive and nasty hit from the Jaguar Primary Spirit Hull double dipping on this effect. And then, because the Hunter ultimate boosts damage to injured enemies a significant amount, what is basically happening is within a fraction of a second, second, you trigger a bunch of Jaguar primary Spirit Hall procs on the little enemies. These procs kill them, which then procs Fell Soothsayer off of the Jaguar Spirit Hall damage, which then all hits the boss. Then when you trigger your next primary Jaguar Spirit Hall proc on the boss itself, it takes in all of those Fell Soothsayer pops into the calculation, it boosts it because the boss is going to become injured, and then it basically just absolutely nukes it to death in one giant hit. That pretty much does it for today, everyone. The top 10 builds in Diablo 4 Season 9 after the 2.3.1 patch has been applied. And hopefully this helps you get an idea of the state of the game right now, or even gives you some inspiration for a build to aim for on your own character moving further into the season. If so, make sure to check out the people that we've shown and credited for each of these builds to get even more information about them, because these people play these builds all the time and know way more about them than I do. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet. Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.